I was sitting at my oak desk in the study, staring at the online banking statement on my laptop, when the number finally registered. $50,000, half of my life savings, had been transferred out of my retirement account at 7 o'clock that morning. There was no authorization request, no notification email, and no signature. But when I checked the joint access logs, the IP address matched the desktop in my daughter Sarah's guest bedroom, where her husband, Brad, spent his afternoons pretending to manage a real estate portfolio. Before I tell you how this unfolded, please leave a comment below and let me know where you're watching from today. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. I didn't lose my temper. After 34 years as a senior credit risk auditor for First National Bank, I've learned that getting angry when a balance doesn't reconcile is a complete waste of energy. You don't scream at a ledger, you pull the transaction trail, locate the discrepancy, and figure out who signed their name to the line. I took off my reading glasses, set them on the leather blotter next to my coffee mug, and walked out to my truck. The drive to Sarah and Brad's house in suburban Fort Bend County took less than 15 minutes. It was a sprawling 4-bedroom brick home with a pristine lawn and a brand new European sports car sitting in the driveway, a house that Brad's meager real estate commissions couldn't possibly support. I didn't knock. I used the spare key Sarah had given me 2 years ago and walked straight into the kitchen. Brad was leaning against the granite island, wearing a tailored silk shirt, holding a glass of iced espresso in one hand and scrolling frantically on his phone with the other. The giant flat-screen television in the living room was tuned to an international sports broadcast, the pre-game analysts debating odds for the upcoming World Cup final between Argentina and Spain at MetLife Stadium. He looked up, startled for a fraction of a second, before his usual slick, condescending smile slid back into place. "Arthur." What a surprise. "Sarah's down at the elementary school until 3, but if you need help with your lawnmower again..." "Where's the $50,000, Brad?" I asked, keeping my voice flat, conversational, and entirely level. Brad didn't even flinch. He took a slow sip of his espresso, set the glass on the counter with a quiet click, and chuckled. "Ah, you checked the account early today." "Look, Arthur, relax. It's not spent. It's an investment, a high-yield allocation. You took $50,000 out of my personal retirement account without asking," I said, stepping closer to the island. "That's not an investment, Brad. That's bank fraud." Brad leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms, his posture dripping with arrogant self-assurance. "Fraud? Come on, old man. Let's be honest about how things work. You're 66 years old. You sit in that drafty house in Houston, hoarding liquid cash under your mattress like it's 1985. You don't know how the modern market moves." "Explain the allocation, Brad." He tapped the screen of his phone and turned it toward me. Displayed on the screen was a confirmed offshore sportsbook ticket receipt. $300,000, Brad said, his eyes gleaming with a strange manic excitement. "Straight money line on Argentina to win the World Cup final in regulation time. The payout is 3-1, Arthur. $900,000 clean when the final whistle blows on Sunday." I looked at the phone, then looked back at Brad's flushed face. $300,000. You took $50,000 from me. Where did you get the other $250,000? Brad waved his hand dismissively, a dark, mocking laugh escaping his throat. "I leveraged the house, Arthur. A secondary equity line. Sarah signed off on it last night after I explained the upside." He took a step toward me, his voice dropping into that toxic, patronizing tone he always used when Sarah wasn't in the room. "You've been an obstacle to our family's wealth for 5 years, Arthur. Constantly telling Sarah to budget, telling her to save, holding us back from living the life we deserve. By Sunday night, I'm going to hand you back your 50 grand with 10% interest, pay off the mortgage, and buy a place in Miami. You can keep your pocket change and your boring little pension." I stood completely still. "You put my daughter's home on the line for a soccer match?" "I put our future on a sure thing," Brad snapped, his smile vanishing, replaced by a cold, sharp sneer. "Argentina has the best squad on the planet right now. It's a done deal. So do me a favor, Arthur. Go home, sit in your recliner, put your feet up, and let the real men generate actual capital for this family." He turned his back on me and walked into the living room, cranking up the volume on the television match preview. I didn't yell at him. I didn't threaten to call the police. I simply reached into my pocket, pulled out my reading glasses, slipped them into my breast pocket, and walked quietly out the front door. As I drove back toward my neighborhood, the math began clicking together in my head with terrifying precision. A secondary mortgage line of $250,000 on a home co-owned by my daughter required a verified primary guarantor signature, especially given Brad's abysmal credit history. First National Bank didn't handle secondary private liens for high-risk borrowers, but their subsidiary, Gulf Coast Capital, did. And I knew the regional underwriting manager personally. When I reached my house, I went straight to my desk, opened my laptop, and accessed the county public deed registry. It took me less than 3 minutes to locate the emergency equity lien filed on Sarah and Brad's property 48 hours ago. I zoomed in on the bottom of page 4, where the third-party guarantor signature was recorded. There, typed cleanly under the digital notary stamp, was my full legal name, Arthur Pendleton, and right above it was a forged, sloppy imitation of my handwriting. I sat back in my chair, the room going dead silent around me. Brad hadn't just stolen $50,000 from my savings. He had forged my name as a personal guarantor on a $250,000 high-interest loan to fund his gambling addiction, a debt that would legally ruin both my daughter and me the second Argentina lost. I picked up my desk phone and dialed my family attorney and former credit risk colleague, Evelyn Vance. She answered on the second ring. "Arthur, I thought you were playing golf this morning." "Evelyn," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a quiet tide, "I need you to pull up the commercial loan assignment registry for Gulf Coast Capital. I have a $250,000 forged mortgage line that needs to be bought out by 6 o'clock today." Evelyn paused on the line. "Bought out? Arthur, if it's forged, you report it to the district attorney. You put him in handcuffs. If I put him in handcuffs today, the bank freezes the deed, forecloses on Sarah's home, and ruins her life before she even understands what he's done." I replied softly. "I'm not reporting it, Evelyn. I'm buying the entire loan deed. I want to become Brad's sole lien holder by tomorrow morning." By 10 o'clock Saturday morning, I was sitting in a private conference room at Vance & Associates on Westheimer Road. Rain was tapping lightly against the third-floor windows, casting a cool, gray wash over the mahogany table where my attorney, Evelyn Vance, had laid out 3 thick folders. "The assignment agreement is fully drafted, Arthur," Evelyn said, adjusting her glasses as she slid the top document toward me. "By executing this purchase, you are personally paying Gulf Coast Capital $250,000 in cash to acquire the secondary mortgage deed on Sarah and Brad's property. Effective, the moment your wire clears, you step directly into the bank's shoes. You become the sole line holder." "And the forged guarantor clause?" I asked, looking at the signature line where my name had been illegally penned. "Because the original lien was procured using a fraudulent signature, the secondary loan was inherently in default from the moment of execution," Evelyn explained, her voice sharp and steady. "Under Texas Property Code, as the new sole lien holder, you hold the absolute right to issue an immediate notice of default and demand full satisfaction of the balance. If the borrower fails to satisfy the balance within 24 hours of notice, you have the legal authority to initiate immediate foreclosure proceedings." I picked up my pen, signed my name at the bottom of the assignment agreement, and pushed it back across the table. "Wire the funds, Evelyn. I want the recorded transfer stamped before noon." "It's done," she said quietly. "Arthur, have you talked to Sarah?" I looked down at my hands that had spent 34 years auditing balance sheets, ensuring that every single cent was accounted for. "I'm going to see her now." I drove to my daughter's school in Sugar Land. Saturday morning meant campus was quiet, save for a few teachers preparing their classrooms for the upcoming week. I found Sarah in room 104, organizing reading workbooks on her desk. When she looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, her smile was warm, but the heavy purple shadows beneath her eyes told me everything I needed to know. "Dad," she said, setting her stapler down, "what are you doing here? Is everything okay?" I closed the classroom door behind me and walked over to her desk. I didn't sugarcoat it. I pulled out a copy of the secondary mortgage document and set it gently in front of her. "Sarah," I said softly, Did you sign this equity line with Brad on Tuesday? Sarah looked at the document, and the color drained from her face so fast I thought she was going to faint. She sank back into her chair, her bottom lip trembling as she stared at page 4. Dad, Brad told me it was just a temporary business line, she whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. He said he needed my co-signature for a commercial real estate listing in Katy. He promised me it didn't touch the house equity. He said if I didn't sign it, I was holding him back from making partner. He lied to you, Sarah, I said gently, and he forged my name as the primary guarantor to get the lender to approve it. Sarah buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with quiet, muffled sobs. I thought love meant trusting him, Dad. I thought if I supported him, he'd finally stop being so angry at everything. Now he put our entire house on a soccer game. I walked around the desk and pulled my daughter into a firm, protective embrace. Listen to me very carefully, Sarah. Trust requires a foundation. Without truth, it's just a gamble. Brad gambled your home, he gambled my savings, and he gambled your future. She looked up at me, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. What are we going to do, Dad? If Argentina loses tomorrow, the bank will take the house. We'll be ruined. The bank won't take your house, Sarah, I replied, looking her dead in the eye with complete certainty. Because I bought the mortgage 2 hours ago. I am the bank now. Sarah blinked, stunned. You bought it? I bought the loan to protect you, I said. Brad thinks he's playing a game where he can lose my money and walk away clean. Tomorrow night, when that match ends, his game is over. I need you to pack a bag tonight, Sarah. Come stay at my house. Leave him in that living room alone. Sarah took a deep, shuddering breath, looked at the forged signature on the paper, and nodded. Okay, Dad, I'll pack tonight. By 5 o'clock Saturday afternoon, Brad was at home, completely oblivious that his wife had quietly moved her essential belongings and documents out of the master bedroom. I sat on my back porch in Houston, watching the sun dip below the trees, when my phone rang. It was Brad. His voice was slurred, background music blaring from a high-end sports bar in downtown Houston, where he was already drinking with his real estate buddies. Arthur! Brad shouted into the receiver, laughing loudly. Just checking in on my favorite retired auditor. Are you watching the pre-game coverage? Argentina's lineup is locked in, old man. Messi's starting. I'm aware of the lineup, Brad, I said calmly. You should be, Brad bragged, taking a loud gulp of his drink, because by 24 hours from now, I'm going to be sitting on a 3-to-1 payout, $900,000. I might even buy your old house from you just to tear it down and build a pool. Have a good evening, Brad, I said softly. Enjoy your quiet weekend, Arthur, he sneered, because on Monday morning you're going to have to look at me and realize who the real earner in this family is. He hung up. I set my phone on the wooden table, picked up my reading glasses and tucked them into my shirt pocket. The stage was set. Brad had placed his entire life on a 90-minute soccer match, firmly believing that his lies were invisible and his power was absolute. He had no idea that in less than 24 hours the final whistle would blow, and the man he dismissed as an old obstacle would be standing at his front door holding the keys to his entire world. Sunday evening brought a muggy, suffocating heat over Fort Bend County, but inside Brad's living room, the air conditioning was blasting at 65 degrees. I sat on the edge of the leather sofa in my own house 10 miles away, watching the live satellite coverage on a quiet 60-inch screen. Beside me on the coffee table lay the original executed notice of mortgage assignment, stamped by the county clerk, alongside a fresh mug of black coffee. I didn't feel tense. I felt the cold, mathematical certainty of a credit auditor watching a high-risk account reach its final maturity date. Across town, Brad was hosting a rowdy watch party in the house he no longer owned. The living room was packed with 8 of his real estate buddies, pizza boxes scattered over the granite kitchen counters, beer bottles lining the coffee table. Brad was standing right in front of the television, wearing a blue and white Argentina jersey, clutching a tumbler of bourbon, his voice booming over the crowd. Look at that back line, Brad shouted, pointing his glass at the screen as the broadcast showed the teams lining up in the tunnel at MetLife Stadium. Spain's midfield is soft. Argentina is going to run right through them in 90 minutes. $300,000 on the money line, boys. By tonight, I'm clearing 900 grand. One of his colleagues, a guy named Marcus, leaned back on the couch. "Hey, Brad, where's Sarah? Isn't she usually here for the big games?" Brad waved his hand dismissively, taking a heavy swallow of bourbon. "She's staying at her dad's place for the weekend." The old man was whining about needing help with his house. You know how it is. Arthur's 66, spends all day counting pennies and worrying about interest rates. Total buzzkill. I told Sarah to go keep him company so I could focus on winning actual capital. He laughed, a sharp, arrogant sound, completely unaware that his wife had packed her 3 bags the night before and left her keys on the kitchen counter. By 8:30, the match kicked off under the blinding floodlights of MetLife Stadium. For 90 grueling minutes, the broadcast rolled on. But it didn't go the way Brad's sportsbook ticket promised. Spain's midfield locked down the center of the pitch, stifling Argentina's attacks, turning the match into a brutal tactical war of attrition. 90 minutes expired with a 0-0 tie on the screen. When the referee blew the whistle for regulation time, the room went slightly quieter. It's fine, Brad yelled, his voice rising, a nervous sweat breaking out across his forehead as he refilled his glass. "They'll break them in extra time. A goal is coming." Because Brad had placed a straight moneyline bet on Argentina winning in regulation time, the 0-0 draw at 90 minutes meant his primary ticket had already failed. But he had placed a secondary $80,000 hedge on Argentina, lifting the trophy, his absolute final reserve. The first half of extra time ticked away, still 0-0. Then came the 106th minute. Spain intercepted a loose pass near midfield. Their winger drove down the right flank and whipped a low, blistering cross into the box. Ferran Torres sliced between 2 defenders, hit the ball on the volley, and drove it straight into the top right corner of the net. Goal, Spain, 1-0. The television announcers erupted into chaos. In Brad's living room, the noise vanished instantly. It was the kind of absolute sickening silence that falls over a room when 8 men realize they are standing next to a financial corpse. Brad stood frozen in the middle of the rug, his bourbon glass slipping slightly in his hand, his eyes wide, bloodshot, staring at the screen as the clock ticked down through the final 3 minutes of extra time. The final whistle blew. Spain 1, Argentina 0. Brad's sportsbook app on his phone flashed a bright, merciless red banner across the screen. Tickets settled, loss, $300,000, gone. The $50,000 he had stolen from my retirement account and the $250,000 he had borrowed against his house, completely wiped out in a single 106-minute window. His friends started gathering their keys, making awkward, quiet excuses, stepping around Brad as he collapsed onto the leather sofa, burying his face in his hands. Within 10 minutes, the house was empty, leaving Brad alone in the dim light of the television screen, surrounded by empty beer bottles and pizza boxes. At 10:15, the front door lock clicked. Brad didn't look up at first. Sarah, is that you? Listen, the game. It was a fluke, a total fluke." He raised his head, and his voice died in his throat. I walked into the foyer, wearing my dark wool jacket, carrying the blue leather binder under my arm. Standing beside me was Evelyn Vance, holding a sealed white envelope. "Arthur?" Brad stammered, scrambling to his feet, wiping his sweaty palms against his jeans. "What? What are you doing here? Where's Sarah?" "Sarah is at my house, Brad," I said, my voice quiet, steady, and entirely free of drama. "She won't be coming back tonight." Brad took a shuddering breath, trying to force his usual arrogant smile back onto his face, though his hands were trembling visibly. "Look, Arthur, I know you're upset about the 50 grand. I saw the score. Argentina lost on a bad call. But listen to me. I have 3 deals closing in August. I can pay you back the 50,000 with interest by the end of the summer. You don't need to involve Sarah in this." Evelyn Vance stepped forward, opening her briefcase and pulling out a stamped document. "Mr. Miller, your $50,000 debt to Mr. Pendleton's retirement account is currently the secondary issue." "What are you talking about?" Brad snapped, his eyes darting between Evelyn and me. "Who are you?" "I am Arthur's legal counsel," Evelyn said calmly, "and I am here to serve you with a formal notice of default and loan acceleration on behalf of the primary lien holder of this property." Brad let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "Primary lien holder? Gulf Coast Capital owns the secondary mortgage. I have 30 days before they even send a late notice." I pulled the blue binder open and set the signed, county-stamped assignment agreement on the kitchen island right next to his empty whiskey glass. "Gulf Coast Capital doesn't own your mortgage anymore, Brad," I said softly, meeting his eyes. "I bought it on Friday afternoon. I paid $250,000 in cash to acquire the deed." Brad stared at the paper, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You bought my mortgage?" "I am your sole lender, Brad," I said, "and because this loan was executed using a forged guarantor signature, my forged signature, the deed was in immediate covenant breach from the moment you signed it. As the sole lien holder, I'm exercising my right to demand full satisfaction of the $250,000 balance within 24 hours. The room went dead quiet. Brad's knees literally buckled. He grabbed the edge of the granite island to keep from falling, staring at me in absolute, unadulterated horror. "You can't do this, Arthur," he choked out, his voice cracking into a high, desperate panic. "I don't have $250,000. I just lost everything on the match. You're my father-in-law." "I was your father-in-law when you stole $50,000 from my retirement," I replied, my voice as cold and clear as winter ice. "I was your father-in-law when you forged my signature on a loan document. And I was your father-in-law when you told me I was just an old obstacle to your family's wealth." I closed the blue binder. "You have until 6 o'clock tomorrow evening to deliver $250,000, Brad, or you hand over the keys." Monday morning brought no relief to Fort Bend County, only the relentless glare of the Texas sun reflecting off the pavement. By 8 o'clock, Brad was sitting on the edge of his ruined living room couch, staring blankly at the cold fireplace, his cell phone lying dead on the floor beside him. He had tried calling 6 different real estate colleagues to borrow money. 4 had ignored his calls, and the other 2 had told him in no uncertain terms that word of his illegal gambling spree was already making the rounds across Houston brokerage firms. At precisely 9 o'clock, a commercial moving van pulled into the driveway, followed closely by Evelyn Vance's sedan. I stepped out of the passenger side of my truck and walked up the front steps, holding the leather binder containing the executed foreclosure deed and the deed of transfer. Brad opened the door, his eyes bloodshot, his shirt wrinkled from sleeping in his clothes. He looked at the 2 movers standing behind me with heavy equipment dollies, then looked at me, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and utter desperation. "You're actually doing this," Brad choked out. "You're throwing me out on the street over a bad bet." "No, Brad," I said, my voice steady, measured, and entirely free of emotion. "I'm executing a legal default on a fraudulent loan. You made the decision to forge my name and risk my daughter's home. I'm simply enforcing the boundary you crossed." Evelyn stepped forward, handing him a single page. "This is your 24-hour notice of eviction and property release, Mr. Miller. The bank accounts under your joint marital name have been frozen pending civil review of the $50,000 extracted from Mr. Pendleton's retirement account. Your personal items have been designated for packing. You have 2 hours to clear your personal wardrobe and leave the premises." "Where am I supposed to go?" Brad yelled, his voice cracking as tears of anger spilled down his cheeks. "I don't have a nickel. My credit is shot." "You have a sports car in the driveway that you haven't paid off and a closet full of designer suits," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "Sell them. Find an apartment. Learn what it means to earn a living instead of trying to steal someone else's lifetime of work." For 2 hours, Brad packed his suitcases in bitter, humiliating silence under the watchful eye of one of my moving crew leads. At 11:15, he dragged his 2 bags out to his car, threw them into the trunk, and turned back to look at me one last time from the driveway. "Sarah will never forgive you for this, Arthur," he shouted, trying to muster one final shred of defiance. "You destroyed her marriage." "Sarah is the one who filed the divorce petition at 9 o'clock this morning, Brad," I replied calmly. "And she did it using the police report for the forged signature you left on my desk." Brad stood frozen for a second, his mouth open, before slamming his car door shut, revving the engine, and speeding out of the neighborhood, leaving nothing behind but a cloud of exhaust. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Evelyn and I met Sarah at the county clerk's office in Richmond. With Brad officially removed from the deed due to the fraud revocation, I executed a clean quitclaim transfer, placing the entire property into an irrevocable family trust set up exclusively for Sarah. The house was now fully protected, unencumbered by Brad's debts, and completely safe from any future claims. When we walked out onto the steps of the courthouse, Sarah pulled me into a tight, tearful embrace. "I'm so sorry I brought him into our lives, Dad," she whispered, her voice shaking against my shoulder. "I thought he was ambitious. I didn't see what he was doing until it was almost too late." "You don't have to apologize for trusting someone, Sarah," I said gently, patting her back. "You just have to learn when to stop covering for them when they prove they don't deserve it. You're safe now. That's all that matters." Later that evening, I sat on my back porch in Houston with a fresh cup of coffee, watching the sky turn a deep shade of purple as the Texas heat finally began to break. The house was quiet. On the table beside me lay my reading glasses and the blue binder, now containing the recorded trust documents securing my daughter's future. Brad had believed that because I was 66 years old and kept my money in conservative accounts, I was soft. He believed that quiet patience was the same thing as weakness, and that he could ride his lies all the way to a high-stakes payout at my expense. He forgot that the men who spend their lives auditing risk are the very ones who know exactly how to close every loophole when a bad debt comes due. He lost his bet on a soccer match in New Jersey, but he lost his home and his marriage because he believed a father's love meant unlimited permission to steal. If someone in your family forged your name and gambled away your hard-earned security, would you sweep it under the rug to keep the peace, or would you take control of the ledger and enforce the law? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.